getting Crane Durham's Nothing But Truth on AFR Talk.
Welcome back. Crane Durham's Nothing But Truth live from the NRB. It is great to be here and great to be with you. Bob Vanderplot's with us. And it is amazing because I am still, there's a side of me, it's in my flesh, that when you have the ability to win a Senate seat. Well, I'll tell the story about Colin Powell. Colin Powell was asked about why didn't he run for president. You know why Colin Powell didn't run for president? He knew he couldn't win. That's not now. You could like Colin Powell, you can dislike Colin Powell, you can look at his record as I do, and I'm troubled by it with some of the statements and the political ones and the smearing of others. But hey, I'm just saying that's not just Colin Powell. The vast majority of people, they look at the polls, they say, hey, can I win? Okay, and that's going to advance me. And oftentimes, I mean, hey, in their hearts, they're saying, I'm going to do good. As Christians, we pray first, and we pray on those things, and we go with God, and God leads us. Now, I remember being a believer in name only in the sense that, yeah, I believed in Jesus, I just didn't take the time to know him. And people would say that, and I go, what do you mean? What does that mean? He tells you. He tells you. God speaks to you. Now, I don't get the, Crane, what'd you just do? No, but he speaks to you. And many of you know exactly what I'm talking about. And he leads you, and you listen. Crane, that must be really tough for you. God must try to get a word in edgewise. Yes, yeah, okay. Yeah, I get it. All right, nice. When a man commits himself that way, it is impressive and to take note. And so that's why we talked about if714.com. Great way to go. Now, our next guest is Warren Cole Smith, and he's the vice president of World News Group and the hosts a radio program. He also writes some very interesting columns, and to the point where I am sitting here, and he's come in and he moved back a little the time that we were supposed to be together, actually moved up, and he made that time to do so. And it's very nice to be around people that are gracious and kind and understanding, especially dealing in the place we're dealing with in media, because a lot of people are like, well, don't you know who I am? Well, I haven't met one of those people yet, but they could definitely say it. Warren Cole Smith, you're right here. Great to be with you, first and foremost.
Thank you very much. It's always great to be on American Family Radio.
Yeah, and I was going over your Twitter feed and some great information, and that's what I want to talk to you about. A number of things, if that's all right. There's so many things I could talk to you about.
It's a target-rich environment for things to talk about.
Yeah, Well, tell me, how, when we're looking at the economy, okay, and jumping right in because of the limited time, but we'll jump right in, and we see a stock market that's gone way up.
Yeah.
And certainly since its nadir in the crisis, and from the crisis, we come back up, and we get one mention of the easing, quantitative easing, QE forever, as Dan Celia would call it.
Yep.
That ending, and it hiccups the stock market, drops. And I'm thinking, are we on the edge of a crash, and why?
Yeah. Well, I make a habit of not making predictions about the future. You know, Yogi Berra said, don't predict. Predictions are dangerous, especially predictions about the future. So I make it a habit of not to make predictions about the future. But I do think that we're in a dangerous environment in terms of the economy. I mean, we've got an economy that even before Obamacare, the federal government was responsible for, controlled, had its hands in between 15 and 20% of the gross national product of the United States. After Obamacare is fully implemented, if it's fully implemented, and of course I know a lot of us are hoping that it won't be fully implemented and maybe repealed, but if it is fully implemented, the federal government will have their hands in about 25% of the gross domestic product in this country. And then when you look at things like the Sarbanes-Oxley Act or the Dodd-Frank Act that exerts such control over the financial markets, the other 75% of the market is also going to be beholden to the federal government. That is a very scary situation for any nation to be in, and one that the United States has never been in. So I'm unwilling to predict that there's going to be a crisis. I know some people are, or a collapse, but I think that it's a very dangerous environment that we're in right now.
How is it that we pass these laws? And you spoke to Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, as we can smile now and look at that. But we don't know what's in them. Furthermore, I want to go to Dodd-Frank. There are some things in there that the language is nebulous. It's not exact.
Yeah.
And expands the power of the federal government to go into banks and pretty much do what they did with the Community Reinvestment Act initially under Carter, and then it got on steroids through Clinton, Bush, and we saw what happened. So tell us, what do we need to do to make sure that we have laws that are written that are clear and actually are in the founder's vision of understanding that the law should not be expansive? Per se.
Well, I mean, you're exactly right. The problem with Dodd-Frank in particular right now is that it is so vague, as you just rightly said, and it's left up to federal agencies to put regulations in place that will flesh out the vagueness of that law. And some of the agencies that are responsible for putting these regulations in place are writing not dozens, not scores, not hundreds, but thousands of pages of regulation that will essentially infiltrate all areas of our economy. And so that's what's scary, is that we really don't know and can't predict what the future of our economy will be, because we don't know what these regulations are going to look like. And the markets hate uncertainty. The markets hate that kind of vagueness and uncertainty, and that's what's so dangerous. What can we do? Well, what I think we can do is we can elect conservatives who understand what the framers of the Constitution meant when they talked about limited government. And, if there's any hope, on both the economic and the political horizon right now, is that I believe that that's happening. I believe that in 2010, with the rise of the Tea Party, we saw a conservative resurgence. I believe that 2014 is going to be a very good year for conservatives in elections. I think we see a very real chance of Republicans holding on to their majority in the House of Representatives and possibly gaining a majority in the Senate, and that's a very good sign.
They're going to the political strategy, the idea that, hey, we're not going to force them on the debt deal, we're not going to be demonized, we're going to stick with Obamacare, keep our focus on that. Do you believe that was a mistake?
Well, I personally do think it was a mistake, but I will have to say, and I know that maybe you and a lot of your listeners will disagree with me on this, I understand why John Boehner did it, because, as you rightly said, it did keep the focus on Obamacare, and I think Obamacare is a winning issue for Republicans, whereas shutting down the government, having these periodic fights over the debt ceiling, while I think they are important, and while I personally would be among those who would have wanted to stand ground on that issue. I am not one of those who want to demonize John Boehner for making that decision. He was guilty of something that George W. Bush called strategery.
Yes, yeah. And outstanding, because oftentimes when we look at this, we may forget at times about the people who are going with a certain line of strategery, and rather than saying, hey, we have the same goals. But what concerned me about Boehner in particular was when he ripped the Tea Party. It was almost as if he had, and he's a human being. I get it. I get the fact he gets ripped one way or another, but that's the gig. He signed up for it. And what frustrated me was the fact that it went back to something that happens a lot for conservatives of any stripe. But what they do is they start adopting the mainstream media's line about the conservatives. And so difference in strategy, okay, gotcha. But the idea that we can take what I believe, and you tell me, do you think the Tea Party is the grassroots base of the conservative movement, the most identifiable right now? And if so, how strong is it? Is it as strong as the cultural evangelical conservatives were in? And remember, there's a cross mix there. I know that we're meshing here. But in 2004, with the 10 states that had the amendment regarding marriage, if I'm not mistaken, is it as strong as that was?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that question precisely. Okay. I do think, though, that the Tea Party is very, very strong. I think that it's a real movement. It's a real political movement in this country. I mean, I think 2010 proved that. I think that now, 2014 12 with the presidential election. Presidential years are always, they're their own kind of beast. But now here we are at another midterm, and I think that, again, we have a very real chance of Republicans and conservatives have a very real chance of making gains, and I think the Tea Party are going to be very much a part of that. And I think the Tea Party is strong. Mm-hmm. I think that it's a coalition that the Republican Party is absolutely going to have to reckon with. And I think on some real key issues, the country is becoming more conservative on some issues like marriage. Mm-hmm. We see some kind of craziness out there, but on abortion, for example, on frustration with the size and role of government, I think that the country is moving back in a conservative direction.
Can we hit the small government, because I think this is where it is. I was talking to a number of people who don't agree with me, and I'm shocked as well. But the fact is that they're not as conservative. They're not seeing things that way. But I said to them, regarding the role of government and dollars and everything else, and really translating, saying, okay, well, who makes that decision? Would you be all right when Roe v. Wade, if overturned, it's going to go back to the states? Can we have the hearts and minds discussion? Of course, I support an amendment to the Constitution. I support it for marriage and life. But I realize that's going to take the conversation. And what concerns me is we've gotten to a point in this country where politics has become, when are we going to use an ism or an ist to identify each other rather than the conversation?
Right.
That we can, because there are so many people I disagree with, but I genuinely, I can appreciate where they're coming from. Mm-hmm. I don't think they're right. I think they're way off. But when it bothers me is the intellectually dishonest debates and discussions take place. And you turn on Sunday morning, and a lot of times that's what you're getting, despite the fact of the brilliance of a Chris Wallace, who's trying to get at some very hard issues. Your thoughts?
Well, I think that we do have to win the conversation before we can win the political battle. It's been said that politics is downstream from culture, mm-hmm. and I believe that. And we conservatives, we Christian conservatives in particular, have got to be more effectively engaged in the cultural conversation in this country. I believe that an important part of the way we do that is with storytelling. I think Ronald Reagan was brilliant at telling stories, and if you a great Greek philosopher, Damon of Thebes, once said, "If you give me the songs of a culture, I care not who makes its laws." And I think that that's something that conservatives have lost. We have lost an understanding of the importance of that cultural conversation. Back a few years ago, whenever the marriage amendments, pro-marriage amendments, yes. and/or laws had passed in almost every state, in fact, in every state mm-hmm. that they'd been voted in, 31 states had passed either a marriage law or a marriage amendment. I remember watching a pro-homosexual activist on television, and the interviewer said, "Aren't you concerned? You guys are 0 for 31." At the voting booth, and he said, "No, I'm not, because Will and Grace is the #1 show on television," and he was right. Now, fast forward 5 years, and we can see that now 17 states in the District of Columbia allow homosexual marriage in this country. So Christians have got to get more engaged in that cultural conversation. We've got to start creating some of the stories that are informing the way people think in this country.
And to that, if you don't mind, I'd like to drill down on that just for a second, because that goes to the issue of marriage, and it always feels like we're always playing defense. We're not the idiot squad of the Westboro Baptist Church, or the hate squad, whatever you want to call it, or the KKK. I talk about this a lot, and the audience is going, "Crane, your all-star idiot team." Yes, the Black Panthers, KKK, and the Westboro Baptist Church. All right, there, boom. But my point is, that's the first thing that we're responding to. Yeah. Should we be stressing how great marriage is?
Well, we should be stressing how great marriage is. We should be telling stories. At World Magazine, we did a marriage, what we called a marriage longevity series. We told stories of couples that had been married at least 35 years. We told more than 30 of those stories over a period of about a year and a half. About every week or week and a half, a new story would show up on our website of just profiling a couple. Many times these couples had endured tremendous adversity in their lives. In a couple of cases, they'd gotten divorced and then reconciled later, just to show that God is a God of second chances. God is always a God of hope, and that it is possible, even in this culture, even when you encounter difficulties, to be in a marriage that lasts and to make promises that last a lifetime. So, yeah, we need to be telling positive stories about marriage.
And as Christ did, telling stories, parables, and detailing that and changing the hearts and minds, and also
Well, that's
eating
right.
with the tax collector.
Well, that's right. In fact, in Mark, I believe it's some of your Bible scholar listeners can fact check me on this. I believe it's Mark 4:34. Jesus said, or Mark says, and he spoke to them not except by parables, except in parables. So, I mean, Jesus employed the storytelling strategy almost exclusively whenever he talked to the masses. And then it said that whenever he met with his disciples one-on-one, he explained the parables, what he meant in those parables. So Jesus understood that people connected with stories. Ronald Reagan understood that people connected with stories. And I believe that the conservative movement needs to start telling stories if they want the American people to connect with the conservative movement.
It's amazing. I think of every time you've mentioned Ronald Reagan, I go back, and YouTube's wonderful, and going back in inflation speech. Reagan made inflation interesting, relatable, and understandable, of saying understanding how it was a tax. And he sat there with a couple dollars and bills and change. And he did it, and he talked about entrepreneurship and what happens and the growth in that. It was outstanding. So relating to your point, and World Magazine, that's what you're doing. You're telling stories.
That's right. I mean, that's what we do. We are professional storytellers, and it's it's just what we do in World Magazine every day. We call it biblical storytelling, to look out at the world with a biblical worldview and try to tell stories that illuminate or incarnate the biblical understanding of the world.
I wish we had more time, but you will come back on the program.
I sure hope so. Thank you.
It's a lot of fun.
Great to be with you.
Great to be with you, sir. All right, so website, please.
Worldmag.com.
Worldmag.com.
www.worldmag.com.
My computer's down, so I can't poke and look at it and cheat, and then the blank. Oh, it's very nice to meet you. Good to see you. Warren Cole. Crane Durham sitting in right here at NRB, Nothing But Truth Style. And we will be back with Dave.